My name is Jesse Calloway. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's one of those places people drive through on their way to somewhere more important. I used to think I'd stay there forever, working in someone else's warehouse, living behind someone else's idea of normal. But I moved, I learned. I made myself into something else. Not smoother, not safer. Just real. There's a scar that curls the left side of my upper lip, a reminder from the surgery I had as a kid to correct a cleft. It never fully settled, and when I smile, or even when I don't, it draws attention. That, paired with the 2 piercings above each eyebrow and the earring I've worn since I was 16, has always made me stand out. Not loud, not rebellious, just unmistakable. Some people see that as confidence. Others see it as a problem that needs managing. At work, they called it an edge. Said it like it was both an asset and a liability. Like I could be used in pitches when they needed authenticity, but should disappear when the real cameras came out. The morning of the team shoot was bright and sharp. Fake smiles, tight collars, everything pressed and polished. They had hired a photographer from the city, someone who specialized in tech branding, visionary culture, young innovation, that kind of thing. I showed up on time. My jacket was clean, my shirt black, simple. I didn't look like the others, but I didn't try to. I'd stopped apologizing for that years ago. We were standing in the open space near the 3rd floor mezzanine. High ceilings, big windows, brushed concrete floors. The whole place had been designed to look expensive, but effortless. That was the image they wanted. People who looked like success just followed them around. They started arranging everyone by department: product on the left, operations center, marketing front row. I hovered near my group, one hand in my pocket, the other holding a half-empty coffee I never planned to finish. Then someone from HR, new, young, her blazer too tight across the shoulders, walked over with a clipboard. She spoke low, but not low enough. I caught the words, "Not a good fit for the frame," and "We're going for consistency." Then a laugh, too short to be friendly. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't push back. I just stepped aside, like she wanted. I moved behind one of the studio lights. From there, I could still see the setup, the easy laughter, the subtle adjustments, the guy in charge pointing and nodding like the whole thing mattered more than the product we'd built. I watched them work around me like I wasn't there, like I was a prop they'd decided not to use. It wasn't new. I'd been pushed out of frames my whole life. School pictures, social events, professional headshots where someone would always offer to crop later. The thing about being outside, the image is that you start to see it more clearly. You start to understand what they're really trying to sell. And you start to understand who gets erased first. I stood there for 23 minutes. I counted. Not because I was bitter, but because I wanted to remember the feeling. The stillness of being sidelined in plain view. The way no one said anything, not even the ones who had worked next to me for years. Silence is louder when it comes from people who know better. The message wasn't just about me. It was about control, about which versions of us were allowed to be seen. After the shoot, they all clapped, like they'd just finished something important. The photographer told them it looked great, said the aesthetic was clean. I watched the images flash across his tethered screen, smiling faces, crossed arms, matching tones. And nowhere, in any of them, was the shape of my body, the line of my face, the mark of my name. I didn't leave right away. I waited until they'd all gone back upstairs. Then I stood in the middle of the empty space and looked at the camera, one last time. It was still mounted on the tripod, lens pointed at nothing. For a second, I wondered what it would capture if it were just me standing there. No filters, no framing, just the truth. But the frame wasn't built for me. And for Guy. The first time I saw that clearly. Not with anger, but with something colder. Something like resolve. Because the thing they didn't know was that while they were busy building their perfect image, someone else, just a few feet away, had hit record. Not on the photos, on the voice, on a moment that wasn't staged. A story I'd told without thinking anyone would hear it, and that's the part they couldn't crop. When I came in the next morning, the office already felt different. It wasn't louder. It wasn't busier. But something about the way people looked at me had shifted, fractionally, like they were trying not to look at all. I felt it in the hallway, in the half-second pauses before greetings, in the careful way no one brought up the photo shoot. That silence wasn't ignorance. It was complicity. They knew. They had seen me standing there, just out of frame, waiting like some uninvited guest to a party thrown in his own house. I sat at my desk like I always did, opened the same spreadsheets, reviewed the same product specs. But my head wasn't in. The numbers. It was still in the mezzanine, still next to that studio light, still counting down the minutes I was deliberately made invisible. My inbox pinged with a message from HR. Subject line, brand alignment and team visuals. That's what they called it now. Alignment. Not exclusion, not censorship. Alignment. I clicked it open. There was no apology, just a paragraph about visual coherence and maintaining a unified brand presence for external facing media. They thanked me for my understanding, as if I'd given it, as if stepping aside hadn't been the result of being silently pushed. I stared at the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking like it was daring me to respond. I didn't. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't be dissected, diluted, or spun back at me. At lunch, I didn't go to the break room. I walked 3 blocks to a food truck and stood there alone, chewing through a dry sandwich and thinking about how many ways a company can erase you without ever touching your job title. You can be praised in meetings, tagged in internal memos, even thanked in town halls, and still be kept out of sight when it actually counts. It's the image that matters, not your mind, not your work, just how well you match the picture they've already decided on. I went back to my desk and pulled up the company website. There it was, bright, polished, safe. Every face staring. Back at me looked like it had been cut from the same template. No scars, no asymmetry, no questions. I wasn't angry at them. Not the ones who posed, not the ones who smiled, not even the photographer who snapped it all. They played the game. They were told to play. Fit in, blend in, rise quietly, but I didn't fit. I never had. And deep down, I think they all knew that. It wasn't just the face. It was what the face represented. Something outside their control. That night, I stayed late. I watched the office empty out floor by floor until the only sound was the soft whine of the HVAC kicking on and off. I walked past the space where the shoot had happened. The backdrop was gone. The lights were packed away, but the air still felt sharp with something unspoken. I stood in the same spot again, this time alone under nothing but the dull ceiling glow. No cameras, no staging, just me. I pulled out my phone, not to post, not to speak, just to look. I opened the front camera and stared at my reflection for a long time. I wasn't surprised by what I saw. I knew the shape of my mouth, the uneven pull of my smile, the heavy set of my brow. I knew what others saw, too, something they couldn't place, something that made them hesitate. In a world obsessed with polish, I was textured, unedited, and that scared them more than anything. I thought about what it would take to change that, to soften my voice, to grow out the piercings, to pay for another round of facial surgery that might make things more symmetrical, more aligned. But none of that would change what was underneath, the quiet resistance that had been building in me since the first time someone told me to step aside. Because this wasn't just about a photo. It was about a pattern of asking people, like me, to contribute from the sidelines, to work behind the scenes, to make space for others in front of the camera. And I had done that. For years. I had worked harder, stayed longer, produced more, But none of that was ever enough to make them look at me the same way they looked at the clean faces in their marketing deck. On my way out, I passed the social media manager's desk. Her screen was open. I caught a glimpse of a paused frame. A moment from a team Q&A filmed a few days earlier. I was in it, mid-sentence, hands moving, eyes locked on someone out of frame. I didn't even remember being recorded. It must have been a background segment, something casual they filmed while testing audio. But the image stayed with me, because in that frame, I wasn't edited out. I wasn't muted. I wasn't cropped. I was real, and someone, somewhere, had saved it. It was a Thursday afternoon when I found out the clip had been posted. I hadn't been tagged. No one emailed me about it. It just showed up, quietly, almost like a mistake, on the company's Instagram story, buried between a group photo from the marketing team and a boomerang of someone clinking coffee mugs. I wouldn't have even seen it if a former colleague hadn't messaged me with a cryptic, "Nice cameo." I tapped through, half expecting a shot of my back or a glimpse of my shoes. But there it was, 39 seconds. One uncut take. I was sitting in a breakout room, half lit by window glare, talking to an intern about a platform integration we were piloting. I didn't know the camera was on. I wasn't mic'd up. I wasn't polished. I wasn't even facing front. But the audio was clean enough to catch every word. I was explaining why we chose a particular architecture for the rollout, why speed mattered less than sustainability, why the user experience had to stay intuitive no matter how complex the backend became. My voice was steady. My face was direct. My hands moved with purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I saw myself without apology. There was no script, no rehearsal, no lighting setup or wardrobe check. Just one moment, authentic, unguarded, and accidentally caught. It had none of the slick branding the company liked to push, but it had something they couldn't manufacture. Weight, purpose, clarity. The kind of presence that couldn't be hidden behind a cropped frame or a strategic silence. The story disappeared, 24 hours later, like they always do, but not before it was screen recorded. Not before someone shared it. Not before it started circulating in circles I'd never even tried to enter. By Monday, I felt the shift. A senior product manager. I'd never spoken to stopped by my desk, complimented something I'd said in the video, then walked away before I could respond. Later, in a team sync, my name was mentioned in a way that sounded deliberate, like someone was planting it. Not as a warning this time, but as an anchor. The eyes in the room didn't look through me anymore. They paused, watched, measured. I didn't know who had pulled that clip or why they chose to post it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was filler content. But it had landed where the polished images hadn't. It had been seen. And more than that, it had been felt. There's a strange kind of power in being noticed for what you were never allowed to present. Not for looking the part, not for fitting the mold, but for making sense, for making something matter, in a single, unfiltered take. That week, I overheard something in the elevator. Two guys from corporate strategy, voices low but excited, talking about that clip from Thursday. They didn't know I was behind them. They didn't know it was me they were dissecting. One of them said, "That's the kind of energy we need in front of clients." I stood still, didn't turn around, just let the weight of that sentence sit in my chest, strange and unfamiliar. Energy. Not edge, not liability, not brand risk. Energy. In a matter of days, that unplanned clip had done what 8 years of service hadn't. It shifted perception. It changed the shape of conversations I wasn't even invited to. I started seeing meetings on calendars that used to skip me. Started getting copied on threads I had no reason to be on. And while no one came right out and said it, I knew what was happening. They were testing proximity, seeing if I'd fit now, seeing if they could reframe me, not change me, but angle the camera just right so they could pretend I had always been part of the picture. But the truth was, I hadn't changed. My face was still the same. The scar hadn't faded. The piercings were still there. What changed was that for once they didn't get to curate the frame. It had taken one unscripted moment. One conversation I didn't know was being recorded. One piece of realness they hadn't pre-approved. And it cracked something open. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone it was me. I let the silence do its work. Because the beauty of one honest take is that it doesn't need to shout. It just needs to land. And this one did. In the days that followed, the silence got louder. Not the kind that ignores you, but the kind that watches. I could feel it in how people started holding eye contact just a second too long, like they were searching for something they hadn't noticed before. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't respect. It was caution. I had become the variable in their equation, the piece that didn't follow the rules but somehow still landed in the right column. And now they didn't know what to do with me. Meetings felt different. My name was on the invites now, but my seat always felt like an experiment. I'd speak and the room would pause, not to listen, but to assess. They weren't ready to treat me as one of them, not yet. But they also couldn't deny what they'd seen. That video, unplanned and unedited, had struck a nerve, and whether they liked it or not, it was tied to my face. The same face they'd cropped from the team image. The same face they'd politely excused from the spotlight. There was a quarterly all-hands coming up, and I noticed my name listed as a potential speaker. That word, potential, clung to the screen like a loophole. It meant they could include me if they needed to, if the story fit, if the optics aligned. But I knew better. I'd seen this game played before. I was the backup story now, the wild card they could pull out to look inclusive, progressive, disruptive, so long as I didn't get too loud, so long as I still knew my place. A week before the event, I found out they had filmed another internal promo. A slick, fast-cut piece showing department heads, smiling engineers, cheerful sales leads, all framed in soft light and tight smiles. I wasn't in it, not even a second, not a flash of motion in the background. It was like someone had edited me out before I could be a problem. Again. That's when it hit me. The clip that went viral, the one that changed how they looked at me, wasn't something they chose. It was an accident, an oversight. The system didn't elevate me. It slipped. And now, even as I was being invited into meetings and have conversations, they were already trying to close the door behind me again. Quietly, carefully, efficiently. I walked past the media room one afternoon and saw the editing bay open. The social team was reviewing the latest cuts. They didn't notice me, but I stood there long enough to catch a glimpse of a timeline, rows of color-coded clips, jump cuts, sound layers, approved takes. I knew that world. Controlled, rehearsed, polished to the point of sterility. There was no room in there for a face like mine, not unless they needed contrast, not unless they wanted to look brave. I went back to my desk and stared at my reflection, in the dark screen. My voice hadn't changed. My work hadn't changed. I hadn't softened my edges or dimmed my tone. And yet, here I was, suddenly occupying space I'd been excluded from for years. But they weren't offering that space because they'd changed. They were offering it because they thought they could use me without letting me in. A few days later, an internal newsletter came out. It highlighted rising voices within the company. My name wasn't there. I wasn't surprised. They wanted the voice, not the story, the energy, not the history. They wanted the impact of my presence without the permanence of my place, and still, I kept showing up. I kept delivering. I kept speaking when asked and working when ignored, because I knew something they didn't. I knew they couldn't control the moment anymore. They could manage the image, yes. They could trim the fat, package the message, mute what didn't match. But they couldn't unhear what I'd already said. They couldn't unsee what I had already been. They thought I was a one-off, a lucky clip, a talking head that worked once. But I wasn't an exception. I was a reflection of everything they claimed to stand for and everything they quietly erased. I didn't need more time on screen. I didn't need applause. What I needed was already happening. The quiet unraveling of a system that had built itself on omission. And they knew it. That's why they kept me close now. Not out of respect, but out of fear. Not because I was necessary, but because I was, suddenly, undeniable. They still hadn't figured out how to frame me, and by the time they did, I would no longer fit in any of their frames. It happened without warning. One of the senior partners from our parent company was in town, shadowing division heads, sitting in on key meetings and shaking hands with people who didn't know what to say to him except yes. He wasn't the kind of man who came through often, maybe twice a year, if that, and when he did, the building tightened. Everyone ironed their shirts, straightened their posture, cleaned their desktops like he might personally inspect them. I wasn't scheduled to see him. I wasn't scheduled to be anywhere, really. That's how it usually went. I worked behind the scenes. My fingerprints were on things, but never my face. That morning, I had come in early to finish a systems deck that had been dragged through 3 revisions without leadership ever really looking at it. I wasn't in the mood for politics. I wanted to get it done and disappear. But halfway through the 3rd slide, someone tapped me on the shoulder. A woman from strategy. Wide-eyed, apologetic, in a hurry. The partner was sitting in on the 10 a.m. product pitch. They needed someone technical in the room to explain the back end. I was the only one available. They didn't ask. They didn't thank me. They just moved out of the way as I stood up and followed them. The room wasn't as intimidating as I'd imagined. Big windows, clean wood, expensive water bottles lined up with military precision. A handful of executives were already seated, voices low, faces still. When I walked in, a few heads turned. Some recognized me. Others didn't, or pretended not. 2. I found a spot near the side wall, not at the table, but close enough to jump in if needed. That was the idea. Be present, but peripheral. Always there, but never in the frame. The meeting started with small talk, brand numbers, charts, projections. Everything moved smoothly, predictably. But halfway through, the partner interrupted. Asked a technical question the lead couldn't answer. Something niche, buried deep in the infrastructure. Silence stretched for a moment, and then heads turned toward me. I spoke because I had to. Clear, direct, no fluff. I explained the logic, the risk, the redundancy layers. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just solving a problem, the way I always had. But when I finished, the room didn't bounce back into motion like I expected. It paused. Something held. The partner looked at me. Not past me, not through me, but directly. He asked 2 more questions. I answered both. He nodded, wrote something down. I didn't say another word for the rest of the meeting. I didn't need to. The silence around me had shifted. I had spoken, and now it wasn't something they could pretend didn't happen. I was no longer the tech guy. In the background, I was a voice that had filled a space no one else could. A space they hadn't prepared for, because they never expected it to matter. After the meeting, people began filtering out fast, like they always do when important conversations end. But I saw something strange in their pace. Not urgency, but unease. A few glanced back at me. Others walked right past, their expressions unreadable. I stayed behind for a moment, collecting my thoughts, watching the sun fall through the glass like it was cutting the room in half. By noon, I had 3 emails, all from internal teams I'd never worked with before, asking for input, inviting me to contribute, looping me into things I had been excluded from for years. I didn't respond immediately, I just read them. And as I did, I felt that quiet resistance in my chest, the one that used to tighten when I watched people sidestep me, speak over me, delete me. That feeling had changed. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pride, it was gravity. Like I'd finally taken up the space I'd been circling around for so long. Later that day, word came down through one of the project managers. The partner had asked about me. Said I had a clarity they hadn't seen. Those were the words. Clarity. Not edge, not potential. Clarity. And now my name was on a short list, an internal initiative being formed for innovation strategy. Early stage, high impact. Not public yet, but real. I was never supposed to be in that room. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't been dressed for it. I hadn't practiced a speech or prepared a pitch. I had simply done what I always did, spoken the truth in a place that didn't know what to do with it. And somehow, that truth had opened a door no one even admitted was locked. They hadn't planned for me to be seen. They hadn't built a frame wide enough to hold me, but I had stepped in anyway, quietly, fully, without asking, without waiting, and now they had to rearrange the room, because whether they liked it or not, I was already inside. They used to look past me, through me, around me. Now they look at me. Not with warmth, not with open admiration, but with something closer to calculation, like they're trying to understand how the story changed without their permission, like they're trying to map the distance between who I was in their minds and who I am now in front of them. It's not a comfortable stare. It's the kind that scans for risk, for leverage, for consequence. After the partner left town, things shifted faster than I expected. Meetings I used to be excluded from now came with direct invites. Projects that once passed through 5 layers before touching my hands were now landing straight in my inbox. No one said why. No one mentioned the clip or the pitch meeting or the moment I stepped into a space that wasn't mine and made it mine anyway. But I saw it in the way they adjusted their tone when they addressed me. How they stopped calling me the back end guy and started referring to me by name in full sentences. I didn't celebrate. I didn't loosen my guard. Visibility isn't victory. It's exposure. And when you've spent most of your life being told you don't fit the frame, you learn that being seen is a kind of test. Will they let you stay? Or are they just making room for a moment before closing the door again? I stayed still. I stayed precise. I made no assumptions. 2 weeks later, I was asked to present at the investor Q&A. The request came from high up, higher than I'd ever had direct contact with. It was phrased as an opportunity, a way to put a face to the ideas. They said I had a compelling presence. The irony of that almost made me laugh. Months ago, my presence had been the reason I was cut from the frame. Now, it was something they wanted to highlight. I didn't change anything. I wore the same black shirt, didn't cover the scar, didn't remove the piercings. I spoke the way I always had, slow, clear, without decoration. I walked them through the architecture of the product, the logic behind our decisions, the roadmap. We were building. I didn't charm. I didn't perform. I just told the truth. And afterward, the room was quiet. Not stunned, not confused, just still, like something had landed. The lead investor looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once and asked if I'd be willing to head the new development track. They were forming a department, small, focused, future-facing. They wanted someone who understood not just the code, but the people behind it. Someone who didn't sell the brand but built it from the ground up. They didn't use the word leadership, but that's what it was. I accepted without ceremony, not because I was overwhelmed, not because I needed the validation, but because I'd already been doing the work. All that changed was who finally noticed. Now, when I walk through the halls, the stares come with hesitation, like they're not sure whether to apologize or pretend the last few months didn't happen. I let them wonder. I don't offer comfort. I don't soften the edge they used to fear, because it was never about becoming acceptable. It was about proving that I never needed to be anything else to matter. There's a photo in the main lobby now, a new one, the whole team, clean background matching tones, carefully chosen outfits. I'm in the center, not because I asked to be, not because I insisted, but because they knew. The room would feel wrong without me now. Sometimes I stop and look at it on my way out, not for pride, just to remember. To remind myself that I didn't force my way into the picture. They just ran out of excuses to keep me out. That's the thing about frames. They don't define value. They only reveal what people are willing to see. And eventually, when the truth gets loud enough, even the most curated image has to make room. Now they look at me, and I don't look away.